Man rescues baby Mustang from drowning. What happens next will leave you speechless. The sky had turned a menacing shade of gray, as thick rain poured down in torrents, drenching everything in its path. The countryside, usually calm and serene, now seemed to be a battlefield, with nature's fury on full display. The river, which had once flowed peacefully through the valley, was now a raging torrent, its waters dark and swift, threatening to sweep away anything in its path. The wind howled, sending waves of rain in all directions. It was a storm like no other. The tension in the air was palpable, and it felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Amidst the chaos of the storm, there came a sound, a faint, desperate cry. It pierced the roar of the wind, almost like a lifeline in the midst of the storm. The cry was high-pitched, full of distress, a cry that came from a helpless soul caught in nature's wrath. Elias, a solitary rancher, was on his way back home from town, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel of his old pickup. His face, though etched with years of hard work, was calm, his mind used to the rhythmic hum of the truck and the endless stretches of farmland. Yet, as the storm intensified, something shifted within him. He had no family to race home to, only the land and the animals he cared for. He had lived alone for years, accustomed to the silence of his surroundings. But when that cry broke through the storm's clamor, it struck something deep within him. Elias's instincts kicked in. This was no ordinary cry. It was a call for help, a desperate plea for rescue. Without thinking, Elias slammed on the brakes. His old truck skidded to a halt in the mud as he stared out into the distance. There, just ahead, he saw it. A tiny Mustang foal, barely a few weeks old, struggling to keep its head above the water. Its small body was being tossed helplessly by the strong current, and it seemed as though every moment was a fight for survival. The foal's cries grew louder, more frantic with each passing second. Elias didn't hesitate. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind made up in an instant. The storm could not be ignored. The danger was real, but the foal's need was greater than anything else. He opened the truck door without a second thought, stepping into the torrential downpour. In that moment, nothing else mattered. "Hang on, little one," he called out, though his voice was barely audible over the deafening rain and wind. The foal's eyes met his, wide with fear, and for a split second, the world around him seemed to disappear. Elias knew what he had to do. Without a second glance at the danger or the storm, he sprinted toward the riverbank. The call for help was louder now, and it was no longer a choice, it was a matter of life and death. He dove straight into the icy river, pushing past the crashing waves, determined to reach the foal at all costs. The cold water enveloped him immediately, the current vicious and unrelenting. Every step was a battle. His muscles screamed in protest, but the foal's cries pushed him forward. He could not, and would not let it die. As Elias plunged into the river, the icy cold water immediately gripped him, dragging him deeper into its currents. His heart raced with each powerful pull, as if the river itself was determined to stop him. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but Elias pushed through the pain. His eyes locked onto the foal, now almost completely submerged in the tumultuous waves. The storm raged above, the wind howling louder as the river carried the foal further downstream. Elias's breath came in sharp gasps, his vision blurring with the relentless rain, but his focus never wavered. He could see the foal's small, helpless form bobbing in and out of the water, its frantic whinnies filling the air. It was close, too close. Elias could feel the foal's fear in the way it struggled, desperate to stay afloat. With every step Elias took, the current pulled harder, trying to sweep him away. His feet slipped on the slippery riverbed, and for a moment, the force of the water was too much. He stumbled, almost losing his footing, his body tossed like a rag doll in the flood. His heart skipped a beat as he watched the foal, its tiny body fighting a losing battle against the current, the water nearly swallowing it whole. In that agonizing moment, Elias reached out, extending his arm as far as he could, his fingers brushing against the foal's soaked coat. With every ounce of strength he had left, he lunged forward, grabbing hold of the foal's mane, pulling it toward him with all his might. But the foal was slipping from his grip, the current so fierce that Elias could feel himself being dragged under. His chest tightened as the water surged around him, but there was no turning back now. He had to save it. Then, in a near-death moment, Elias's foot slipped entirely. He was swept under the water, his head submerged in the freezing current. For a split second, everything went black. His lungs burned, and the deafening roar of the river filled his ears. Panic surged as he fought to surface, his body thrashing against the water, every breath feeling like an impossible task. But just as his strength began to fade, Elias broke through the surface, gasping for air. The foal was still there, struggling in his arms, and this time, Elias wasn't about to let go. He pulled the foal closer to his chest, feeling its tiny heart race in rhythm with his own. The storm felt miles away now, as Elias pushed forward, using the last of his strength to carry the foal to safety. The water raged around them, relentless and unforgiving. Elias could barely see through the sheets of rain that pelted his face, and each step felt heavier than the last. The foal, though small and weak, was a living, breathing force of will, clinging to Elias as if its life depended entirely on him. And it did. The current was unforgiving, constantly threatening to pull them back into its powerful grip. Elias's legs were numb, his body aching, his arms trembling under the weight of the foal. Every step was a battle, each one pushing him closer to the safety of the riverbank. But with each step forward, the water seemed to pull them back too. Elias's breath became ragged, his vision beginning to blur again from exhaustion. His heart pounded in his chest, and he knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. His muscles were beginning to give out, his strength slipping away with each passing second. His feet found unstable footing, and once again the water tried to take them both. In that terrifying moment, Elias felt his grip on the foal weaken. The tiny creature, now shivering from the cold, was slipping from his grasp. The river surged one last time, and he felt himself lose his balance, ready to be swept away again. A panic rose in his throat as he thought for a moment that both he and the foal might be lost. But with a final, desperate surge of will, Elias pushed through the pain, planted his feet on solid ground, and with everything left inside him, he dragged the foal to the river's edge. When they finally reached the riverbank, Elias collapsed to his knees, completely drained. The foal, still trembling, was safely in his arms, but there was no time to rest. Elias quickly checked the foal, feeling for any sign of life. The small creature was weak, its body chilled to the bone, but it was breathing. That was all that mattered. Elias cradled the foal in his arms, his heart still racing, his body on the edge of collapse, but he couldn't let it go. The storm was still raging above, the wind howling fiercely, but Elias's focus was on the foal, his tiny miracle. Slowly, the foal's shivering subsided, and it nuzzled its head into Elias's chest, finding warmth and comfort in the only shelter it had. Elias, too exhausted to speak, simply held the foal, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek as he breathed in the moment. He had done it. Against all odds, he had saved this life. The river, the storm, the danger. It had all been worth it for this tiny creature that now rested in his arms, safe from the raging waters. The storm wasn't over, but for Elias, and for the foal, the battle had been won. And in that moment, as the rain finally began to ease and the wind softened its howl, they both knew something miraculous had just occurred. Something that would change both of their lives forever. The days after the rescue passed in a blur of exhaustion, yet Elias never let his guard down. After pulling the Mustang foal from the river, the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. As the storm subsided, Elias managed to find shelter in his small barn, its walls creaking against the wind, offering little protection from the outside world. But inside, he focused all his energy on bringing the foal back to life. He named her Shadow, a tribute to the dark waters she had escaped from, and because of her jet-black coat that seemed to absorb the light around her. The foal's body was frail, and the shock of the cold water had left her weak, shivering uncontrollably. Elias quickly set up a small, warm pen for Shadow near his own living quarters, where he could keep a close eye on her. Each day, Elias stayed by her side, nursing her back to health. He knew this wasn't just about providing food and shelter. It was about restoring her will to live. He carefully fed her small doses of milk, coaxing her to drink even when she struggled. The trauma of the river was etched deeply into her mind, and she refused to drink at first, her body too weak to respond. But Elias never wavered. He spoke to her softly, reassuring her, and with patience and persistence, she slowly began to drink. Night after night, Elias would sit next to her, watching over her. The exhaustion that had once gripped him now seemed secondary to the bond that was growing between them. The days of relentless storms faded into a calm, still winter, and Shadow slowly regained her strength. Elias could see the spark of life returning in her eyes, her body gaining weight, her legs growing stronger. But more than that, he could see a flicker of trust in those eyes. The wild fear that had once been there was gradually replaced by a quiet curiosity and, at times, even affection. Despite Shadow's progress, the trauma of the river remained with her. Every time Elias would try to lead her to the nearby riverbank for a walk, her legs would stiffen, and her eyes would widen in fear. The memory of the rushing waters, the freezing grip of the current, seemed to haunt her every step. The mere sound of running water would cause her to freeze, her body trembling uncontrollably. Elias had seen it in her, the way she recoiled, even when the storm had long passed. He understood. The river had been her near-death experience, and the fear was still deeply rooted in her. But Elias wasn't about to let that fear define her. Every day, he would gently encourage her, taking small steps toward the river, always reassuring her with his presence. He knew that healing wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about helping her conquer the fear that had become her constant companion. One day, as the sun set over the mountains, casting a warm golden glow across the land, Elias stood at the edge of the river with Shadow by his side. The water flowed gently, far less threatening than before. Shadow paused, her ears flicking nervously, but Elias didn't rush her. He stood quietly, waiting, offering her time to process the calmness of the river. Slowly, with tentative steps, Shadow dipped her hoof into the water. It was the first step she had taken toward overcoming her past. It wasn't a grand leap, nor was it a bold move. But in that moment, Elias knew that healing was happening. The river's trauma might not ever fully fade, but there was hope. There was trust being rebuilt one small step at a time. As the weeks passed, the bond between Elias and Shadow deepened. They were no longer just two individuals who had survived a storm together. They were a team, partners in recovery. Elias began to take her on longer walks, farther from the barn, exploring the lush fields that stretched across his land. Shadow's confidence grew with each passing day, and Elias could feel her trust in him blooming like a delicate flower in the spring. He would laugh as she kicked up her heels and ran through the fields, her black coat gleaming in the sunlight. The foal was becoming a horse, strong, playful, full of life once again. And Elias, who had never wanted a companion beyond the animals he cared for, began to feel something he hadn't known he was missing: companionship. On those quiet evenings when the barn was still, Elias would sit by the window, watching Shadow as she grazed peacefully in the fields. A sense of peace washed over him, knowing that he had not only saved a life, but had given her a chance to truly live. And in return, she had given him something he hadn't realized he needed: the comfort of knowing that together, they had both healed. Shadow's eyes no longer held the terror of the river, and Elias's heart no longer carried the weight of guilt or fear. Together, they had faced the storm, the river, and the odds. And together, they had found something beautiful. A bond built not on words, but on the shared understanding of survival, of healing, and of trust. One crisp, early morning, as Elias and Shadow roamed the familiar fields, a change in the air seemed almost palpable. The sky, once a soft blue, had turned an ominous gray. The birds that usually filled the air with their songs had fallen silent. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elias paused, instinctively sensing something was wrong. He looked out toward the horizon, where the once calm river now seemed to rush with a newfound intensity. Elias's gaze narrowed as he spotted something moving through the trees at the far edge of the property. A shadow, slipping between the trunks. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? His thoughts flashed to the wild predators that occasionally roamed the area, the wolves and mountain lions that lurked in the forests nearby. But this felt different, more deliberate. The calm that had settled into Shadow's recovery was about to be shattered. As the wind picked up, bringing with it a biting chill, Elias's senses heightened. He could hear something in the distance, a faint rustling, a sound growing louder by the second. The danger was closing in, and Elias was no longer sure if he could protect Shadow as he had before. He moved toward her, his mind racing, his heart thumping with adrenaline. The storm that had passed weeks ago was nothing compared to what lay ahead. In that moment, Elias understood. The river, the predators, everything Shadow had overcome. It was all a test. And this was the true challenge. As Elias moved to gather Shadow and take her back to the barn, the danger became painfully clear. The forest surrounding the fields had been stirred into movement by something larger than they were. Something that threatened everything Elias had worked so hard to protect. In the distance, a loud growl echoed through the trees. Elias's stomach tightened. He turned to Shadow, his hand brushing over her mane. She was no longer the frightened, weak foal who had once trembled at the river's edge. Shadow's coat, now gleaming and strong, rippled with energy. She stood tall and proud, her eyes sharp, scanning the horizon for the source of the sound. The fear that had once haunted her seemed to have vanished, replaced by something else. A deep, instinctive understanding that the danger was real, but she wasn't backing down. Elias had seen this before, the glimmer of courage that appeared when an animal was pushed to the brink. Shadow, though young, had found within herself a bravery he hadn't expected. She no longer depended on him to protect her. She was ready to protect him, too. As the growling grew louder, Elias felt a surge of pride for the Mustang foal that had come so far. She was no longer the fragile creature that had needed his help to survive. She was becoming her own strength, the very embodiment of resilience. And in that moment, he realized that whatever threat lay ahead, they were no longer two helpless souls. They were a team. With a calm that seemed out of place given the tension in the air, Elias looked at Shadow, his voice steady. "Let's go, girl. We've faced storms before. We'll face this one too." Shadow, responding to his words and the unwavering bond between them, stamped her hooves and snorted, ready to face whatever lurked in the shadows. Together, they were no longer just survivors, they were fighters. Elias knew that the time had come for them to prove it. The sound of the growl grew louder still. Then, in an instant, a figure emerged from the woods. A mountain lion, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The two stared at each other for a brief moment, the predator sizing up its prey, and Elias realized the truth. The mountain lion was not just hungry, it was desperate. But Elias and Shadow had something the mountain lion didn't. They had each other, and they had the courage to face down the threat no matter how fierce. Shadow stepped forward, her hooves digging into the earth. She was ready to stand her ground, not just for herself but for the person who had never given up on her. Elias placed a hand on her back, silently telling her he believed in her, in their strength. This was no longer just about survival. It was about overcoming fear, facing danger, and proving that, when the world seems darkest, courage could still light the way. After the standoff with the mountain lion, the danger slowly faded, and the dust settled. Elias stood beside Shadow, his heart pounding, not just from fear, but from overwhelming pride. Shadow had faced the threat head-on, showing a bravery beyond her years. As the lion retreated into the wilderness, Elias knew that they had passed the ultimate test. Word quickly spread throughout the small town about the Mustang foal and her courageous stand. People who had once doubted Elias's ability to care for her now saw the transformation she had undergone. She was no longer just a weak, frightened foal. She was a symbol of strength. Elias realized that their journey together was more than just survival. Shadow had become a beacon of hope for the entire community. Her story spread, inspiring those who were struggling, those who felt lost or broken. Shadow's survival, her courage, and her resilience proved that even in the most desperate circumstances, there was always hope for recovery and strength. Shadow's journey became a symbol of resilience. She wasn't just a Mustang foal who had survived a drowning. She had conquered her fear, faced danger, and emerged stronger. She had turned her pain into power, showing everyone that recovery was possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. Elias looked at Shadow one last time that evening, under the quiet, starlit sky. They had come so far. Together, they had faced the worst and come out victorious. And in that victory, they had found something far more powerful than survival. They had found hope, courage, and a bond that would last a lifetime. Shadow was no longer just a survivor. She was a living testament to the power of resilience and the strength that comes from never giving up. As the days passed, Shadow's transformation became even more apparent. She was no longer the fragile, frightened foal that had once struggled to survive. Now, she was strong, graceful, and confident, running freely in the fields with a newfound sense of purpose. But it wasn't just her body that had changed. It was her spirit. Shadow had not only recovered physically, she had embraced life in a way that Elias never expected. Elias, too, had been transformed by their journey together. He had started this path unsure of what would come next. But now, looking at Shadow, he realized that she had not only changed his life, but had also opened his heart in ways he hadn't anticipated. Their bond was undeniable, built on shared struggle and triumph. And that connection had deepened in ways that words couldn't express. They were no longer just man and horse. They were partners, each having saved the other. The impact of Shadow's miraculous survival and courage reached far beyond Elias's farm. People from the surrounding towns came to hear her story, inspired by the Mustang foal who had defied all odds. Her recovery became a symbol of hope for others facing their own battles. Whether they were dealing with physical pain, emotional scars, or the weight of difficult circumstances. Elias's actions, too, were celebrated. His decision to save a life that seemed lost to many was more than just an act of kindness. It was a reminder to everyone that even the smallest gestures of love and care could create ripples of change. The community, which had once been skeptical, now looked to Elias and Shadow as an example of what resilience, love, and compassion could accomplish. As the sun set one evening, casting a warm golden glow over the farm, Elias watched Shadow graze peacefully in the field. He knew that their journey had only just begun. They had faced adversity, but in doing so, they had created something far more beautiful. A lasting legacy of hope and courage that would continue to inspire others for years to come. Together, they had changed not only their own lives but the lives of those around them, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the power of love and resilience could create miracles. If Shadow's incredible journey has touched your heart, don't let this story end here. Share this video with friends and family who could use a dose of hope and inspiration today. If you believe in the power of resilience, kindness, and the bond between humans and animals, leave a comment below and let us know how this story has impacted you. And remember, no matter what challenges you're facing, like Elias and Shadow, you too can overcome them with courage and determination. Stay strong, keep fighting, and let this story be a reminder that hope is always within reach. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that show us all the power of kindness and resilience. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll continue to share incredible stories of transformation and triumph.